The Disciples of Peter Thiel and the Dumbest Bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Thank you for joining us for Mark and the Millennials. This podcast is called The Disciples of Peter Thiel. Who are they? Well, first of all, who is Peter Thiel? Well, Peter Thiel is a German-American billionaire entrepreneur and venture capitalist. He is an American, first of all. And he is a venture capitalist who made billions of dollars as co-founder of PayPal, Palantir Technologies, and Founders Fund. He was also the first outside investor in Facebook. So as you can imagine, he has kind of a golden Midas touch, if you will. Whatever he seems to touch turns into a billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar company. His net worth is reported to be about $2.2 billion. It says here he was born in Frankfurt, Germany. He moved with his family to the United States as an infant. So he was an infant when he moved here. So come on, guys. I mean, it's like German, American. He's an American. He spent a portion of his upbringing in Southern Africa before the family settled in California in 1977. He studied philosophy at Stanford University and earned his JD from Stanford Law School. So he's obviously an incredibly bright person, Peter Thiel, because of the fact that he founded PayPal, the alternative payment method system, online system for payment. He also, of course, he was the first outside investor in Facebook. So we're calling this podcast The Disciples of Peter Thiel because Peter Thiel, by all intents and purposes, you would think, as a result of his upbringing, would be somebody that would probably be more left of center, if not downright progressive. Because after all, he went to Stanford. He grew up in Northern California in the San Francisco area. He's a tech mogul. I mean, he has all of the right credentials to be a far left guy. But in 2016, Peter Thiel, seeing what had been happening in the tech community, how they had kind of lost their minds as a result of the beginnings of censorship and the outright power that they were wielding nationwide, Peter Thiel decided to back Donald Trump in 2016. Something unheard of. And of course, as you can imagine, he got a lot of blowback in Silicon Valley because billionaires from Silicon Valley, they're not allowed to back Donald Trump, certainly not in 2016. And certainly not in 2020. Well, Peter Thiel did it. He did it as in to say he backed Donald Trump because of the fact that Trump was talking about how America's heartland and manufacturing industries had been gutted. And the gutted industries were moved to China and to Mexico and elsewhere. And the gutting of America's industries was done with the full acquiescence of the elected officials who clearly, in my opinion, most of them just didn't know what they were doing. They just aren't very smart. And I think that's clearly what Peter Thiel thinks as well. So here we are in 2021, and Peter Thiel has many disciples. These are people that have worked with him in his various companies and in the investment community as well. And one such individual is Blake Masters. And Blake Masters is running for United States Senate in Arizona. So Blake Masters actually is a strong Thiel ally, as you can imagine. He's launching his Arizona Senate bid. And in The Hill, it says, The Hill magazine, or The Hill newspaper, says, Blake Masters, a top ally of GOP mega donor Peter Thiel, launched a bid in Arizona's Senate race Monday as the GOP field vying to take on Senator Mark Kelly grows. So the field's growing, and of course, Blake Masters jumped into it. Masters is the chief operating officer at Thiel Capital and president of Thiel Foundation, has recently become involved in Republican politics, including in 2020, when he headed a PAC that raised more than $3 million to elect Republicans to the Arizona state legislature. In a campaign launch video, Masters touched on a number of GOP culture war issues like immigration and critical race theory, while casting himself as an ally of working families. And so we have two clips of Blake Masters, who is a Peter Thiel disciple, who is now running for United States Senate in Arizona. This just announced. And here is one clip of his newly released video as he's running for Senate. Here it is.
One big thing that does change when you grow up and have kids. You no longer take things for granted. Now, the country I grew up in was optimistic. People thought all you had to do was go to school and work hard. You'd be able to buy a house and raise a family. But it hasn't worked out that way. Today, for the first time, young people in America expect to be worse off than their parents. Our leaders have shipped millions of jobs to China. And the internet, which was supposed to give us an awesome future, is instead being used to shut us up.
Yeah, so our leaders have exported jobs to China, and the internet, which was supposed to be the panacea for our economy and growing our economy and creating high-paying jobs, is being used instead to shut people up. And so here is the second part of this ad release from Blake Masters running for United States Senate in Arizona. Here it is.
The truth is, we can't take America for granted. And if we want to keep it, we got to fight for it. Because we are up against a media that lies to us, schools that teach our kids to hate our country, and corporations that have gotten so big, they think they're bigger than America. It's time to put this country first. We need to enforce the law, and we need to finish the wall. We got to build an economy where you can afford to raise a family on one single income. And instead of pretending that we can somehow fix foreign countries, we got to take care of each other right here at home.
Yeah, so here, that is Blake Masters running for U.S. Senate in Arizona. And here's a guy who is saying, kids, when you have kids, when you have children, those children change the way you see the future of your country. They change the way you see the future of your country because you no longer think it's all about you. You realize you want what you've had in your life to continue for them. In fact, you want it to even be better. You know, that uniquely American notion that the next generation should have an opportunity at a better life. And what Blake Masters is saying is, well, that's no longer the case. For the first time in American history, people are saying throughout the country, and they're saying so in actual polls, that they don't think their children are going to have an opportunity to a better life. And this is largely because, as Blake says, quote, our leaders have shipped millions of jobs to China, and the internet, which was supposed to give us an awesome future, is instead being used to shut us up. We are up against a media that lies to us, schools that teach our children to hate our country, and corporations that have gotten so big that they are bigger than America. And we all see this and we all know this. And this gentleman is a disciple of Peter Thiel. And I'm calling these guys disciples because these are incredibly bright people, educated at terrific universities throughout the United States. They're very knowledgeable about the future economy, namely the part of the economy that deals with anything that is digital. And these guys know that we must win that war with China. And it is a war. We must win this economic war. And we're not going to win this economic war by being the country that educates everybody else because we have great universities, but then exports those technologies once we create the new companies. So, for example, instead of exporting the manufacturing of the all-important chips, computer chips, and chips that go inside of phones and so forth, and all of that technology, why aren't we making it right here in the United States? I mean, those are all incredibly important, high-paying jobs. Instead of just teaching people how to design the next best chip, and then exporting its manufacture, why not make it here? That is his point. And then he said something that's really interesting, by the way, that I have no doubt triggered the left. I think you heard it too. Blake Masters said, we used to be a country that had families where one parent would work, and he said it a little bit better, of course, a little bit more carefully. One parent would work and that would support a family. And can you imagine, of course, because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people out there, including women, going, oh, so what you're saying is women should stay in the home. It's not what he's saying. He's saying that we used to be a country where one parent could work, and that was more than enough income to support the entire family. And then if the other parent, whether it was the mom or the dad, wanted to stay home with the children or wanted to do other things to enhance and grow the family, then they had options. And his point is we don't have those options as families now, because now, as everybody out there in podcast land knows, when you are married and you start having children, in order to be able to, generally speaking, support your lifestyle, you almost have to have the mom and the dad working, which is really kind of a shame. It really shouldn't be that way. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of other factors that go into this, like, you might decide to buy a house that's too big, or you might have expensive cars. I mean, you could probably scale down your life, but the fact of the matter is that we know there are so few high-paying jobs as compared to in the past, and the cost of living just seems to keep going up. So another disciple of Peter Thiel is J.D. Vance. So J.D. Vance is running for United States Senate in Ohio. And it's just another fascinating thing, because J.D. Vance is also someone who has worked with Peter Thiel over the years in various capacities. And he has a pretty fascinating background himself. So in Time magazine, it's actually in Real Clear Politics, they of course are attacking this idea of J.D. Vance running for anything. And what is it? It's Real Clear Politics said, they said, J.D. Vance, the Democrat Party is a party of childless people, and I think that affects their view of the future. So J.D. Vance effectively is carrying on the same message as Blake Masters. Namely, that so many Democrats and so many people in the Democrat Party are people who are single without children or married without children. And that's fine, by the way. That is a choice that you have if you don't want to have children and you realize you're not going to be a great parent. You're probably making the right choice by not having children. But his point is that Democrats don't have the same level and same stake in the country and the same outlook of the country as so many Republicans do who have children. Why is that? Now, of course, it's going to trigger a lot of Democrats out there. It's pretty simple. When you have children, everything changes, as I said already. You start thinking about not just your own mortality, but the fact that when that happens, you want your children to inherit a country that is very similar to the country that you inherited. Namely, you want to leave it better off. And Democrats don't really seem to care about that. Certainly, the Democrat Party, or at least the part of the Democrat Party that is childless. So here's J.D. Vance. He's carrying on Blake Masters' comments that the importance that children matter, and it matters also how we leave them this country. And we have that clip, and here it is.
Absolutely. It's you don't think about your investment in the community, in the nation in the same way if you know that your children aren't going to inherit it, right? I mean, one of the reasons I really care about this country, not the only reason, of course, but a reason I really care about it is because long after I'm dead and gone, my children and grandchildren are still going to be here. They're still going to be trying to build a life here. And the Democrat Party is a party of childless people. I think that affects their view of the future. Like you said, how could it not? But there's another thing that's just more disgusting going on here, which is the suggestion that American families should be stable and secure. The idea that it's a problem that we don't have enough babies in our own country is racist. Like, what are these people talking about? It's so crazy. You can't even talk about real problems in this country without them labeling you a racist, and it makes it impossible to have a real conversation with these people. They're all just so psychotic.
So that's J.D. Vance, who, by the way, grew up in Appalachia, in the United States, of course, and grew up incredibly poor. Was raised by his grandmother. His mother was a full-blown drug addict. He witnessed all of that. and somehow managed to get up and out and go to Yale, and started doing business with Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel recognized, of course, his talent. And now he is a Peter Thiel disciple who's running for United States Senate in Ohio, just like this gentleman, Blake Masters, is running for United States Senate in Arizona, both Peter Thiel disciples. So in Time magazine, as you can imagine, they have to attack J.D. Vance because he has just an extraordinary resume. This resume is extraordinary because when you start in incredibly humble beginnings, like J.D. Vance, and you make it in America, and you demonstrate that that's possible, not that it's always been possible, but that it's still possible. Democrats get completely triggered over that. They hate the idea. They hate the idea that you actually have the opportunity to get up and out and do extraordinary things. And so they have to, of course, completely disrespect you and throw you under the bus and say, oh, that really didn't happen. He's really a bad person now. So here's Time magazine. Time magazine has an article that says, breakfast with J.D. Vance, anti-Trump author turned pro-Trump candidate. And of course, Time magazine is going there with the anti-Trump author because they know that J.D. Vance, of course, is running in Ohio, and they're trying to split him away from the Trump base. Keep in mind that J.D. Vance is a Peter Thiel disciple, and Peter Thiel is a big supporter of Donald Trump's. But naturally, if you're in the mainstream media, you have to do whatever you can to undermine any candidate, especially those candidates that undermine the Democrat Party's primary philosophy. And that is that once you're born in poverty, you can never get up and out on your own. It's impossible. You can't do it. You're stuck there, which of course is antithetical to the American experience. And J.D. Vance just proved the fact that that's not true. So here's what the article says. I'm not just a flip-flopper. I'm a flip-flop-flipper on Trump, J.D. Vance says with a laugh, slicing into a half stack of breakfast pancakes. The Hillbilly Elegy author, because J.D. Vance wrote that, and newly minted Republican Senate candidate is sitting at the counter of a Cincinnati diner on July 2nd, explaining why he thinks he can win. The prior evening, Vance had launched his 2022 bid at a steel tube factory in his hometown of Middletown, Ohio, with others who believe in the American dream and blasts of populist rhetoric. How terrible. The elites plunder this country and then blame us for it in the process, he told a crowd of several hundred. So here's the thing. I could go on and read this article, but you can imagine essentially what they're doing is they're saying, well, he's anti-Trump and so forth. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance is literally talking about, as is Blake Masters, the exact same issues Donald Trump brought up in 2016. They have adopted his issues, as have so many others. The difference with the J.D. Vance and Blake Masters is, while they've adopted the Donald Trump issues, these guys know how to bring us into the 21st century economy and repatriate high-tech manufacturing back in the United States, as well as all manufacturing back in the United States. They know how to do it because these guys are really smart and they are successful businessmen in their own right. And that's why we need more of these types of candidates running in the Republican Party. And that's why I'm talking about this in this podcast, The Disciples of Peter Thiel. Will they save America? Because really, both of these individuals are saying we need to save America. And think about this for a minute, podcast listeners. How many United States senators and United States congressmen have you seen who don't know the first thing about the 21st century economy? Many of them can't even use the internet or email because they're like, oh, my secretary or my assistant takes care of that. I don't have to do that. I'm just too important. They don't even know how to use it. And it's true. You think this is absolute truth. I know plenty of people who are their age, in their 50s and 60s and 70s, who are in these offices and do not use the internet and do not use email. In fact, one of their favorite statements is, it's hard to believe, it's like, oh yeah, go ahead and fax me that. It's like, you ask a millennial what a fax is. Do millennials even know what a fax is?
Yeah, but we don't use it.
Who uses a fax, right? But you would use Adobe products. You would scan it. You would just take a picture of it with your phone and send. I mean, obviously, there's so many options. These are the people who are running this country, both Republican and Democrat. And they are highly educated in their own right. At least they think they are. But they've never continued their education. So they really don't know anything about the 21st economy and how important it is that we win in the digital sphere. And they don't really understand because they haven't been in it. Well, Peter Thiel's disciples have. We need more of these people in government. We need these people to win, not to mention they're running in incredibly important states like Arizona and Ohio. So I just want to say kudos to Peter Thiel for putting his money where his mouth is and backing these individuals and hopefully many others who aren't just, Republican hacks who just memorize talking points, because I'm sick of that. All right, talking about, you need to build the wall, Of course we need to build the wall. We all agree about that. But there's a little bit more to saving our country than just building the wall. That's an incredibly important part, podcast listeners. But the other part is we actually need to have an economy where people actually build things again and make things again and design things again and create things again. And you know what? I want people who are leading our country and in the United States Senate who have actually done just that. And that would be J.D. Vance. And that would be Blake Masters. And that would be, of course, Peter Thiel. So get this, podcast listeners. The Democrats have launched an oversight of the Arizona election audit. So in Arizona, there's an audit of the election that is ongoing. And I know many podcast listeners know about this. By the way, you're probably not going to read a lot about the Arizona audit in the mainstream media because as far as they're concerned, it's not happening. And for the most part, you can't even talk about it on any kind of social media like Twitter or Facebook or other areas because they will block it. Because the idea that they have, the 15-year-olds at Facebook and other social media outlets like Twitter is that if you actually talk about it, then there might be some momentum that grows where people say, well, you know what, let's look into that. Maybe there is something to the fact that when you mail out ballots to people and then they mail them back, there probably should be folds in that ballot that's about 18 inches long, where you have to fold it 3 times in order for it to go into the mailbox and then, put a stamp on it. Or if all of it already prepaid postage, then you don't need to put a stamp on it, but you certainly need to fold it. Well, if there are no folds in it, and you have thousands of those, that could be a potential problem. So that's what the audit is looking at. It's looking at auto signatures. It's looking at whether or not there are folds. It's looking at whether or not ballots were counted more than once. Seems pretty reasonable to me. But in the Hill newspaper, it states that Democrats now want oversight of that GOP Arizona election audit. So you got the GOP in Arizona who are conducting the audit. And then you have Democrats who are like, no, we've got to oversee this. And these are the Democrats at the national level. We've got to oversee this because we don't want anything to come out from this. We don't want you to learn about anything that has to do with the ballots, because when you have an election that's that close in Arizona, where Trump lost by 11,000 votes, it wouldn't take a whole lot to flip the election if you found some things out. And there are enough questions, certainly by the Trump voters, that the audit was warranted, and I believe the audit was warranted. So here's what the article states. Democrats on the House Oversight and Reform Committee are launching an investigation into the Republican-led audit of the 2020 presidential election in Maricopa County, Arizona. Republicans in the Arizona State Senate approved an audit of the 2020 election vote in Maricopa County in April, despite a number of previous audits confirming that the vote was tabulated accurately. So the previous recounts, all they did was they rescanned the same ballots through the scanners. They didn't examine the ballots. They didn't look at the ballots to see if there were auto signatures on it or if they were actual signatures. There was no signature check. There was no check to see if multiple ballots had been counted more than once. And there was also no check to see if there were actual folds in absentee ballots. That's what the audit is looking into, right? But Democrats don't want that. So it says Republicans in the Arizona State Senate approved the audit of the 2020 election vote in Maricopa County in April, despite a number of previous audits. Yes, President Biden won Arizona's 11 electoral votes over former President Trump by slightly shy of 11,000 votes, becoming the first Democratic presidential nominee to win the state in decades. In decades. Trump and his allies have since alleged the vote was marked by fraud. Representative Carolyn Maloney, Democrat of New York, and Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, a complete lunatic, by the way, I know this guy, are the two top Democrats on the Oversight and Reform Committee. On Wednesday, penned a letter to the CEO of the private firm that was tapped to lead the election audit in Arizona, requesting information as part of a probe that will determine if the audit was warranted or part of an effort to undermine confidence in America's elections. So these are two congressmen, United States congressmen in Washington, that are illegally intervening in the Arizona audit. A state audit, because states are in charge of running the elections, not the federal government. And these two lunatics, certainly Jamie Raskin especially, Democrat of Maryland, have written the audit company and demanding information and demanding that they have oversight of the audit company when they have no constitutional right to do so. Americans' right to vote is protected by the Constitution and is the cornerstone of our democratic system of government, Congressman Maloney and Raskin wrote in the letter to Douglas Logan, the CEO of cybersecurity firm Cyber Ninjas. By the way, that's a great name for a company, Cyber Ninjas. You know, the Cyber Ninjas are going to come in and verify whether the vote in Arizona was appropriate and fair. The committee is seeking, quote, this is from Jamie Raskin, the committee is seeking to determine whether the privately funded audit conducted by your company in Arizona protects the right to vote, or is instead an effort to promote the baseless conspiracy theories, undermine confidence in America's elections, and reverse the result of a free and fair election for partisan gain, they added. These two, above all, are two of the biggest Democrat hacks in Congress. Jamie Raskin is a Democrat hack. He has no interest in progressing the United States of America into making it a better country, bringing companies back to the United States, lowering the tax base for the small businesses, helping the little guy. He's just a hack. I mean, he was highly engaged in both impeachments of Donald Trump. I mean, he just is, in my opinion, I think the guy has a mental health issue. I've thought that for a long time. A lot of my colleagues think it as well. The lawmakers said, back to the Hill, the lawmakers said that they are concerned about cyber ninjas participating in the audit. They specifically said they are looking at the company's lack of experience in conducting election-related audits, its embrace of election conspiracy theories that claim there was voter fraud, and reports that the firm engaged in sloppy and insecure audit practices that comprised the integrity of ballots and voting equipment and were questioned by the U.S. Department of Justice. So now you see. The company Cyber Ninjas, which is doing this cyber audit in Arizona, now has the United States Department of Justice looking into it, which of course is controlled by the Biden administration. Interesting. So why would you want to stop the Cyber Ninjas from looking into this in great detail? Why? What would be the benefit of learning more? I mean, you're already the president of the United States. You've already won. At least you think you have. Yeah, I didn't say that. And you're in the White House, but you have to stop the counting, right? You can't, no more counting now that we've won. Stop the counting. The letter also says that there is concern regarding reported mismanagement of the audit on behalf of the firm. Oh, so a couple of congressmen in Washington are saying the firm is mismanaging the audit. I mean, they're not even there. They're in Washington, D.C. One represents New York State or New York City, somewhere around there, the greater New York area. And the other represents the incredibly progressive Marxist county known as Montgomery County, Maryland. and that would be Jamie Raskin. And now they're saying, oh, we know the cyber ninjas are doing a really bad job. We're in Washington. We haven't seen anything, but we know they're doing a really bad job. I mean, it's just almost hard to believe. And you think that's enough about what's going on in Arizona and Washington, D.C. to stop it. In Georgia, according to the Western Journal, in Georgia, the Georgia election experts uncover 35,000 potential illegal votes cast. By the way, in Georgia, Trump lost by only 12,670 votes. Now, I just want to make it clear for the podcast listeners that when I read these articles, I'm reading from the articles. I'm sharing this information with you. All right. I have to be particularly careful because I don't want to be deplatformed from YouTube or from any of the other social media Marxist organizations. So I have to be very careful and say, I'm reading from these newspapers, and they're legitimate newspapers that they're coming out of, such as The Hill and Western Journal magazine and others. And you've also seen Tucker Carlson, and he's talked about this. I'm reading from them, okay? In the months following the 2020 election, the state of Georgia made headlines for its razor-thin election results, as well as some dubious practices that called those results into question. In an attempt to quell those fears, Georgia initiated both an audit and a statewide recount of the election results. In both cases, officials said the results confirmed now President Joe Biden's victory. Yet, according to a report Friday in The Federalist by senior contributor Margot Cleveland, Georgia was still the scene of violations of various legislative mandates designed to prevent fraud and to ensure the integrity of the vote. First, Georgia has a law requiring residents to cast their vote in the county where they reside, unless they change their residence during the 30 days directly prior to the election. Atlanta election lawyer Jake Evans told Cleveland that if Georgia residents who moved to a new county more than 30 days before the election had voted in the county where they previously resided, their vote in that county would be illegal. Cleveland also interviewed Mark Davis, president of the Duluth, Georgia-based marketing firm Data Productions Incorporated, and a voter data analytics expert who has conducted an unofficial audit of the Georgia votes in November. Davis researched data from both the Georgia Secretary of State's office and the National Change of Address database, which is maintained by the United States Post Office, and found almost 35,000 Georgians moved to new counties but voted in their old county, according to Cleveland's report. Davis said some of those moves could have been temporary, meaning the votes would still be legal. But Cleveland noted approximately 1/3 of the votes at issue could have altered the outcome of the election. In addition, Davis dove even deeper into the numbers and confirmed the number of disputed votes was approaching the threshold needed to flip the results. When Davis ran the data, he found that of the approximately 35,000 Georgians who indicated that they had moved from one county to another county more than 30 days before the November general election, as of May, more than 10,300 had updated their voter registration information, provided the Secretary of State the exact address they had previously provided to the USPS, Cleveland reported. I need to read that again. Quote, when Davis ran the data, he found that of the approximately 35,000 Georgians who indicated they had moved from one Georgia county to another more than 30 days before the November general election, as of May, more than 10,300 had updated their voter registration information, providing the Secretary of State the exact address they had previously provided to the USPS, Cleveland reported. Those same 10,000 plus individuals all cast ballots in the county in which they had previously lived. In other words, the moves were not the kind of temporary relocations that would have made those votes legal. Davis's data proves significant because critics of Trump's challenge to the certification of Georgia's election Results frame the NCOA information as either unreliable or an insufficient magnitude to cast the outcome of the election in doubt, Cleveland wrote. But by updating their voter registration information with the same address as contained in the NCOA database, the voters themselves have established the reliability of that information. So, podcast listeners, there's a problem in Georgia. There is a problem in Georgia. And there is a likely problem in Arizona. But certainly in Georgia, where the night of the election, the counters were asked to go home, and yet people continued to count while all the poll watchers left. We all remember that. And we were told, not only are we not going to talk about it, but we're not going to let you talk about it on social media because you will be banned if you do. And now we have these individuals looking at one thing that they talked about right immediately before and after the election with respect to Georgia, namely that there was a genuine concern that people would be moving from outside of state en masse into Georgia just for the purposes of changing their residency so they could vote in the Georgia election for Joe Biden. Something that Democrats, by the way, have perfected all throughout the country, namely cheating. And by the way, it's legalized cheating nonetheless because they move in just in time so they can register legally, but then it ends up being illegal because they really never intended to stay in Georgia. And once they vote, they move right back to their other house, of course, which is in a nearby state or maybe a state far away. But they're that crazy the way they vote. And so now all this information is coming out. It's all coming out. And to me, this really hits home, and it should hit home to you podcast listeners, because in light of what's happening now in Texas, where Democrats have decided that they can't have voter ID, they're terrified of voter ID, and yet we're finding more and more information about the 2020 election. Because in the Wall Street Journal, it says Republicans and Democrats in Texas continue their standoff over the voting bill. Democrats raised $500,000 in Texas for the sole purpose of allowing them to charter that jet to go to Washington, D.C. and spend the 30-day session in hotels in Washington, D.C. The 30-day session being the session they're supposed to be in Austin, being part of, but instead they're in Washington, D.C. So some donors gave them money so they could not even do their job as lawmakers. And so if you're a podcast listener and you're wondering, I'm not really sure about the 2020 election, or, it's too late, Joe Biden's won, and we shouldn't really bother looking at, we need to continue to look into this because we now see that Democrats even want to cheat when it comes to voting on bills as elected officials. They want to cheat by leaving and running away to Washington, D.C. and not doing their job back home because they don't like the bills that are being passed because it might have to do with election integrity. Just unbelievable stuff. And so podcast listeners, we talked the other day about Kamala Harris, how she was talking about rural voters and how stupid they are. Speaking of voter ID. And Kamala Harris has now been roasted like crazy on social media on her comments. It's unbelievable. First, let's remind you about what she said. We have that clip, and here it is.
People are talking about potential compromises. Mm-hmm. Is agreeing to voter ID one of those compromises that you'd support?
I don't think that we should underestimate what that could mean. Because in some people's mind, that means, well, you're going to have to Xerox or photocopy your ID to send it in to prove you are who you are. Well, there are a whole lot of people, especially people who live in rural communities, who don't, there's no Kinko's, there's no Office Max near them. People have to understand that when we're talking about voter ID laws, be clear about who you have in mind and what would be required of them to prove who they are.
That's right. So in Texas, all of you folks who are legislators, when you pass, voter ID laws and you require people to demonstrate that they have an ID and that they show their ID in order to get an absentee ballot, you need to make sure that those rural voters in Texas, of which there are many, because there are huge, vast rural areas in Texas, you need to make sure that they all have copying machines, because we know they're too stupid to be able to figure out how to use those really difficult absentee ballots, especially when you include a voter ID with all of that as well. And so in the New York Post, they say Harris slammed for saying voter ID laws wouldn't work for rural voters. So she's getting roasted on social media. So Vice President Kamala Harris was criticized Saturday for suggesting that rural Americans wouldn't be able to comply with the new voter ID laws because they lack photocopying equipment. Harris was asked on Black Entertainment TV about whether she believes there is room for compromise with Republicans on measures requiring voters to include a copy of identification with their ballots. I don't think we should underestimate what that could mean, because in some people's minds that means, well, you're going to have to Xerox or photocopy your ID, as she said. There are a whole lot of people, especially people who live in rural communities, who don't have Kinkos. There's no Office Max near them, Harris continued. Critics blasted Harris on social media over the comments. Quote, Kamala and her party think rural communities don't have cars or shopping or retail or internet or phones or computers or mailboxes, conservative commentator Stephen L. Miller posted on Twitter. This reminds me they made Kamala Harris, who has only ever lived in cities, an envoy to rural Americans. Freelance journalist Zaid Jilani wrote. Harris was referencing recent measures passed in Republican-led states like Georgia and Texas that supporters claim will reduce election fraud, but that detractors argue will disenfranchise voters. So I thought that was pretty good. I have to read Stephen Miller's again, because it's kind of epic. He says, quote, Kamala and her party think rural communities don't have cars or shopping or retail or internet or phones or computers or mailboxes. Conservative commentator Stephen L. Miller posted. Yeah, we're just like a bunch of dumb hicks. We really don't know how to use any of that stuff. Except that the fact that we live in the rural communities demonstrates why we need that stuff probably more than anyone, which is why we all probably have it in our houses, or we use our friends' houses, or guess where we go in our community when you don't have that? To the library, because they have all of those resources and they're all free. And that's, by the way, nationwide, I'm quite certain. So get this, podcast listeners. The DHS chief says Cuban refugees will be turned back if they come to the United States of America. So in Daily Wire, Biden's DHS chief to Cubans hoping to make the sea voyage to the United States. You will not enter the United States. Now, this is the same guy, by the way, who is saying nothing about the millions of people who are now crossing, certainly hundreds of thousands, but soon to be in the millions, crossing the border from Mexico into the United States. He's saying nothing about that. He's not saying to them, you will not enter the United States. But if it's Cubans, they can enter the United States. I wonder why that is. So the Biden Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas responded to the ongoing crisis in Cuba by saying that any Cubans that attempt maritime migration to the United States would not be allowed into the country. Mayorkas, who is Cuban, which isn't that incredible? He's Cuban himself, claimed that the Biden administration stands in solidarity with the Cuban people and their call for freedom from the repression and economic suffering that the Cuban authoritarian regime is causing. The Coast Guard, along with our state, local, and federal partners, are monitoring any activity that may indicate increases in unsafe and irregular maritime migration in the Florida Straits, including unpermitted vessel departures from Florida, Cuba. So meanwhile, I think what he's really talking about there is that there are many Florida boat owners who are running supplies to the embattled Cuban protesters. So in the Daily Wire also, there are many people in South Florida who are just hopping in their boats, loading it up with supplies like food, since the people in Cuba many are starving. There isn't enough food. There isn't enough medicine despite their nationalized health care. And the American citizens, primarily American Cuban community, are hopping in their boats from the United States as American citizens, and they're just taking them over there. But the Biden administration doesn't want that to happen. It's okay, in other words, if you are part of a Mexican cartel and you're extorting people and getting them to pay you to bring you from Central America and South America and Mexico into the United States across the border with Mexico. But if you're Cuban American, you can't take a boat to Cuba and pick up a bunch of Cuban dissidents and bring them to the United States because you're going to get arrested. It's just, Biden administration just keeps striking out. I mean, one after another. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Of course. Here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is Senate Bill 82. California legalizes theft. You heard that correctly. The state of California is trying to legalize theft. And Senate Bill 82, introduced by Senator Nancy Skinner from, of course, the San Francisco Bay Area, the very woke area where theft is okay. Wonder how long the retailer is going to be open there. Well, just to give you some ideas about what this bill is about, here's CBS Sacramento reporting on Senate Bill 82. We have that clip, and here it is.
Yeah, the bill hopes to redefine robbery, Tony, and the penalties that come with it. But tonight it's something that some people are calling simply a slap on the wrist.
It's going to declare open season on Californians.
Yuba County District Attorney Clint Curry says the crime bill would wreak havoc on our communities. SB 82 would turn robberies of less than $950 that don't involve weapons or cause serious injuries into petty theft.
Yes, so it would be just a petty theft if you rob someone of merchandise that is $950 or less. So I just want to read a little bit from Senate Bill 82 so you understand. The existing law, the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, enacted as an initiative statute by Proposition 47, as approved by blah, 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 requires the theft of money, labor, property to be considered petty theft, punishable as a misdemeanor of up to 6 months in jail and so forth. This bill, however, Senate Bill 82, would define the crime of petty theft in the first degree as taking the property from the person of another or from a commercial establishment by means of force or fear without the use of a deadly weapon or great bodily injury. The bill, here it is, podcast listeners, are ready? The bill would specifically exclude from the crime of petty theft in the first degree, acting in concert with one or more persons to steal merchandise from one or more merchants' premises or online marketplace with the intent to sell, exchange, and return the merchandise for value. And so effectively, what we're saying is that the bill allows you to steal legally. And if you're a police officer and you're on the beat and you're walking and a merchant runs out the front door and says, "That guy just stole from me, officer, go get him." And of course, in current normal America, the officer would naturally be more than happy to apprehend the individual, chase them down, apprehend them, arrest them for theft. And then they would be prosecuted. That's what we call the teaching moment. That's why you're prosecuted for stealing, because someone needs to teach you, because apparently you didn't learn that from mom and dad, which is a whole nother issue. But now, of course, why would any officer go and chase the person for petty theft who's stealing under $950 worth of stuff? Because they're not going to be prosecuted. And you know they're not going to be prosecuted in California. Most definitely not in the greater San Francisco area. And this is San Francisco area. This is a coordinated effort, podcast listeners, because as you know, George Soros is getting these crazy prosecutors elected throughout the state of California. And they don't want to prosecute any crime. So naturally, the next step is to get these bills passed. So we have a number of other clips. You're going to love this. Here's NBC Bay Area reporting on SB 82. Here's that clip.
Yeah, they say proposed criminal justice reform could actually lead to more crimes. NBC Bay Area's Christy Smith is live in Oakland with more on that. Christy.
Well, Terry, several people spoke out about the crimes today here in Oakland, crimes that people have seen, many of them recorded on surveillance cameras. Well, this event was led by the Oakland Chinatown Chamber of Commerce, and several people who spoke said that they were concerned about the possible unintended consequences of SB 82.
This is when you know the media is getting dumber. And by definition, I feel like maybe all of America is getting dumber, because that was NBC Bay Area reporting. And the anchor there says, some say that if SB 82 were to get passed, that crime might go up. It's like, well, what do you mean some say? Any reasonable person knows that if you're legalizing theft up to $950, you're literally legalizing it in California, you're going to have more of it. More of it. And so who are these people? Who is this Nancy Skinner, Senator Nancy Skinner, who put this in? We're going to read about her in a minute. But first, she released a statement. She wouldn't even talk to the media, which is another issue, podcast listeners, because if you're a true journalist, an investigative journalist, you would not in any way, shape, or form accept just a statement from Nancy Skinner. You would pursue her. You would go to her door where she actually lives and say, look, Senator Skinner, I know that you've released a statement and you think that's enough, but we actually want to talk to you about SB 82 because we want to talk to you about the unintended consequences of the bill and why you think that that's okay. Oh, by the way, Nancy Skinner, have you actually ever owned a business in your life? Have you ever owned a storefront, bricks and mortar storefront in your life? Do you know what's happening to those people in the San Francisco Bay Area now, where they have roving gangs going through? Well, here's NBC reporting on Nancy Skinner's official statement to the news outlet. Of course, she won't talk to them in person because she doesn't think she has to. Here's that clip.
Now, again, her office is saying in that statement in part that if enacted, SB 82 will not change or reduce the criminal penalty on violent assaults. They added that it would update a statute that allowed prosecutors to elevate a petty theft into a felony robbery and would establish a distinction between theft and robbery for cases when no deadly weapon was used and no one was seriously injured. Again, people here, though, saying that they are concerned about possible consequences. Reporting live in Oakland, Christy Smith, NBC.
Yes, people are concerned about possible consequences. I mean, that's the news media, right? People are concerned. People aren't concerned about, people are terrified of the consequences because we are already seeing what those consequences are. There are coordinated crime sprees in the greater San Francisco area that are forcing the retailers to close their stores and limit their hours. And that's because California wants to raise the threshold for felonies from $450 to $950 in stolen goods. And so Fox News reports coordinated crime sprees in major cities in California, New York, and elsewhere are forcing retailers to close stores and limit hours as packs of shoplifters, these are gangs, not packs, gangs of shoplifters regularly make off with hundreds of dollars worth in merchandise to be resold online at street markets or returned for gift cards. So I got to tell you something. That is the ultimate in guts, right? You go, you rip off the store, $950 worth of stuff, and you do it in a way that you have, like 10 people in the store at the same time. And the store can't keep track of who's stealing what, but they know something's going down. And then you all run out. And then you come back 5 days later, or you send your sister or your brother or someone who wasn't there at the time, and you return the merchandise for gift cards. I mean, that's unbelievable. So amid a crime wave sweeping San Francisco, 5 Target store locations are reducing their operating hours. So as you can imagine, this is wreaking havoc in the greater San Francisco area and in New York. So here's KPIX reporting that the Bay Area Asian community fears there are going to be more thefts and more hate attacks. So if you are listening to the podcast, you'll, of course, hear KPIX reporting about how the Asian community is already getting attacked, primarily, by the way, by individuals in the Black community. And they have stores. The Asian community has many stores in the greater San Francisco area, and those stores are being ripped off. And they don't know how to fight back. And how would you know how to fight back when you have Senator Nancy Skinner who wants to legalize theft? So they're like, well, wait a minute. We're already having problems. The bill passes. Now the problem's going to grow exponentially. And you can hear this, of course, but if you were to see it online, on YouTube, on Facebook, or elsewhere, you'll see some of the attacks where these Black bandits are attacking people and pulling, some of them grandmothers, taking their purse, knocking them to the ground, hurting them. Well, that wouldn't, of course, fall under something that you would prosecute. So here's KPIX reporting. We have that clip, and here it is.
Hey, Brian, they were talking about Senate Bill 82 or SB 82, which would reclassify robberies and turn them into petty crimes. Now, a lot of the Chinese leaders are saying if that is done, it would not just hurt Chinese seniors, but also everyone who lives in the state. Opponents of the bill filled the Pacific Renaissance Plaza this afternoon. Oakland Chinatown leaders say if SB 82 is enacted, many of the recent attacks would be considered petty crimes.
We think that this bill, especially at this time, is tone deaf.
East Bay State Senator Nancy Skinner wrote the bill. Under SB 82, robberies that do not involve deadly weapons and don't result in serious injuries would be considered petty crimes. For example, this robbery of a grandmother in Oakland last month would be considered a first-degree petty crime if she wasn't badly hurt and the robbery amount wasn't over $950.
So you can injure someone, steal their stuff, and it's not like really a crime as long as you didn't get really hurt, as long as you just got hurt a little bit. So Nancy Skinner, this is her bill, Senator Nancy Skinner, SB 82 is her bill. She is, according to her own website, a social justice advocate, energy and climate change trailblazer, an accomplished legislator. Nancy Skinner was first elected to the Senate in 2016 after completing 3 terms in the state assembly, which is the lower house. Senator Skinner currently serves as chair of the Senate Budget and Fiscal Review Committee and vice chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus. Skinner has authored groundbreaking laws like SB 206, the Fair Pay to Play Act, making California the first state to give college athletes the right to earn money from their name, images, and likeness, SB 1421, opening up police misconduct records for the first time in 40 years, and SB 1437, overhauling California's unjust felony murder rule. While in assembly, she authored AB 153, requiring Amazon and other internet retailers to collect sales tax. I mean, so it's like she is really proud of the fact that she likes to tax the heck out of you. She likes to decriminalize things that are commonsensical with respect to criminal law, like stealing from people. And she is the author of Senate Bill 82, which legalizes theft in California. And that is the dumbest bill in America. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.